Every major news network on Earth ran the same headline on June 12th, 2026. Elon Musk, world's first trillionaire. History made. It was on your phone. It was on your television. It was in every conversation you had that weekend. And it was wrong. Not because the number was wrong. The number is real. $1.1 trillion. That is Musk's net worth on paper, and no one in recorded modern financial history has ever held that much. But here's the thing nobody in those newsrooms stopped to ask. Has anyone in history, anyone ever, controlled wealth that dwarfs even that number? The answer is yes. And his name is one that most Americans have never been taught. This is the story of the real first trillionaire and what his life tells us about what wealth actually means. His name was Mansa Musa, and he ruled the Mali Empire from 1312 to 1337. The Mali Empire, at its peak, controlled more than 50% of the entire world's known gold supply. Not 50% of global markets. Not 50% of one industry. Half of all the gold that existed in the known world at that time flowed through and was controlled by one man. When historians and economists try to convert his wealth into modern terms, the numbers become almost impossible to express. Some estimates place his fortune at the equivalent of $400 billion in today's money. Others say higher. Some say the number is simply incalculable because the Mali Empire's wealth was so completely intertwined with the entire global gold supply that there is no modern analogy that works. Here is the clearest way to understand it. In 1324, 12 years into his reign, Mansa Musa decided to make a pilgrimage to Mecca. He traveled from his capital city with a caravan of 60,000 people. 12,000 of them were servants. Each servant carried 4 pounds of gold. Another group of 500 carried golden staffs. And Musa himself? He gave away gold so freely to so many people in every city his caravan passed through that he caused one of the worst inflation crises in the history of the Middle East and North Africa. He flooded Cairo, Medina, and Mecca with so much gold that the value of gold collapsed across the entire region. Economies were destabilized. The gold market took over a decade to recover. One man gave away so much wealth on a single trip that he broke the economies of multiple nations. That is not a modern billionaire story. That is not even a modern trillionaire story. That is something in a category so far beyond our current vocabulary for wealth that the word trillionaire doesn't even reach it. Now here is where it gets honest, because the media has a defense, and it is not entirely wrong. When financial journalists say Musk is the world's first trillionaire, most of them mean the first modern trillionaire, the first person to accumulate $1 trillion in wealth as tracked by contemporary financial markets in the era of verified, audited, publicly traded assets. And that qualification is fair. We cannot put Mansa Musa's wealth into a Bloomberg terminal. We cannot verify his stock compensation or his equity stakes. The line between a ruler's personal fortune and his empire's treasury was not drawn in the 14th century the way it is in a modern S-1 filing. Economists and historians frequently debate whether imperial rulers, Musa, Augustus Caesar, Genghis Khan, should be included in rankings of personal wealth at all, because their wealth was inseparable from state power. But here is what that caveat actually reveals: something far more interesting than any stock price. The only reason Musk's trillion counts and Musa's does not is because we have chosen to define wealth in terms of financial markets, in terms of equity and ownership structures and Bloomberg indices. We have decided that the kind of power Mansa Musa held, control over the material foundation of an entire global economy, doesn't count because it didn't come with a ticker symbol. That is not a historical fact. That is a choice about what we agree to call real. And if you want to stay within the modern financial era, if you insist on ticker symbols and verified asset statements, there is still an argument to be made that Musk is not the first. John D. Rockefeller became the world's first billionaire in 1916. The founder of Standard Oil controlled at his peak approximately 1.5% of the entire United States economy. Adjusted for today's GDP, that share of the American economy would be worth somewhere between $300 and $400 billion. By some calculations, approaching the trillion-dollar threshold, depending on which methodology you use. Rockefeller's Standard Oil controlled 90% of all oil refining in the United States at its peak. Not a niche, not a sector. 90% of the fuel that powered the country's entire industrial revolution. We broke up Rockefeller's empire because it was too large for democracy to tolerate. Today, we celebrate a man worth $1.1 trillion and call him the first of his kind. The comparison is not unfair. It is the point. So what is Musk's trillion, really? It is not cash. He cannot go to a bank and withdraw $1 trillion. His wealth is tied up in equity stakes, shares of SpaceX at its current market price, Tesla shares, XAI, Neuralink, the Boring Company. These are paper values. They exist as long as the market agrees they exist. Tesla stock has fallen 40% in a year before. SpaceX, now public, can move 5% in a single session. Musk's net worth is not a vault of gold coins. It is a real-time number that changes every time any of his company's stock prices move. Mansa Musa owned the gold. He controlled the physical supply of the substance that was, in his era, the foundation of all global trade. His wealth was not a paper valuation. It was the actual material. That distinction does not make Musk's achievement less remarkable. Building companies that the market values at this scale, from nothing in a single lifetime, is genuinely extraordinary. But it does complicate the headline. First trillionaire implies a clean record that history does not support. The more accurate headline is this: Elon Musk is the first person to reach $1 trillion in verified market-based wealth in the modern financial era. That is still historic. It just doesn't fit on a chyron. Here is the real lesson inside this story. Wealth is not an objective number. It is a measure of power, and the unit of measurement changes with the era. In the 14th century, the unit was gold. In 1916, it was oil. In 2026, it is equity in technology companies. Mansa Musa could destabilize the economies of entire regions by being too generous on a single trip. Rockefeller controlled the fuel of an entire industrial revolution until the government broke his company apart. The unit changes. The nature of the power does not. What makes all three of these figures historically significant is not the number. It is the concentration. The fact that this much of whatever the most fundamental resource of the era happens to be ended up in the hands of one person. That has happened before. It will happen again. And the question that matters is not who counts as the technical first. The question is what we do, as a society, when it does. If this made you think differently about a headline you saw on Friday, you know what to do. See you in the next one.